And to welcome all of you to this special part of our Shabbat service, and that is getting some words and pearls of wisdom from my distinguished colleague. We are delighted to have Rabbi A. James Rudin with us today. Rabbi Rudin was born in Pittsburgh, attended Wesleyan University, graduated from George Washington University. He received his rabbinical ordination in the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in New York City. And I say that because I don't want to confuse that with Cincinnati or LA or Israel. And he knows why I'm saying that. And did graduate studies in history at the University of Illinois. The Rabbi Rudin holds an honorary doctorate degrees from St. Leo's University, St. Martin's University, and from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. As a member of the American Jewish Committee's professional stand and being the director of their staff for 32 years, Rabbi Rudin served as their chief advisor and director of the Interreligious Affairs Department. He is currently the American Jewish Committee's senior interreligious advisor and a member of the organization's Board of Governors. He is a distinguished visiting professor of religion and Judaica at St. Leo University and teaches at Florida Gulf Coast University. Rabbi Rudin served congregations in Kansas City, Missouri, Champaign, Urbana, Illinois, and was a chaplain in the United States Air Force stationed in Japan and Korea. I'm delighted to welcome Rabbi Rudin, my distinguished colleague, to share with us some pearls of wisdom, and we'll give you some time, not much time, but some time to ask some questions of Rabbi. Rabbi Rudin.
Thank you. I asked the rabbi whether that was gin or vodka. Well, I'm always happy to come to Temple Shalom and to see my colleague from Rabbinical School, Rabbi Saul Lagan and his wife Arlene. Especially tonight, I'm very pleased my cousin, Dr. Neil Zussman, is here. And you may know that his mother was my first cousin, but more importantly tonight, she was such a force for good and creativity in this congregation, Phyllis Zussman. So it's always a bit of coming home. And I want to welcome all the Roman Catholics who are here tonight. During my 32 years at the American Jewish Committee as the director of Christian-Jewish Relations, I spent more time in basilicas, cathedrals, churches, Quaker meeting houses, monasteries, not convents, but monasteries, than I did in synagogues, because my job was to be a kind of an ambassador to the Christian community throughout the world to improve relations between these two very ancient global communities, the Jewish community and the Christian community. I owe a great deal to the United States Air Force because not only did they allow me to spend 2 years in Asia, in Japan and Korea, but it was there in the Air Force that the interest in interreligious relations, the relations between Christians and Jews, and Rabbi Hagan knows this very well. It was a time in the 1960s, and I was there, and I was the only Jewish chaplain, military chaplain, if you know your geography of Asia, south of Tokyo and going around south of Seoul, Korea. Now, it's very interesting, and this is how I got into interreligious relations. We all shared the same building, the same chapel. There was no Catholic chapel, Jewish chapel, Protestant chapel. We all had one building in Itazuki Air Base in Japan. And I hope there's no one here named Susan, because we had a big lazy Susan up here. And on Friday nights and Saturday mornings, it would spin around and it would look something like Temple Shalom here in Florida, Port Charles. That is to say, there was an ark and a Torah scroll, and it was set up for Jewish services. When we were done, the lazy Susan would spin around again, and it would be ready for the 9 a.m. Sunday morning Catholic Mass. When that Mass was over, it would spin a third time around, and it would be ready for a Protestant service. We all shared the same sanctuary, the same building, the same support staff, and there were 5 Christian chaplains and myself there. And you can imagine the conversation over 2 years. What do you believe? What are these holidays? Tell me about the Mass. Tell me about the Advent. Tell me about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The Christians would ask me, and so on. So I owe a great deal to the United States Air Force in many, many ways. But perhaps the most tangible was that I became very interested in Christian and Jewish relations. I grew up in a very small town. At that time it was a small town of 30,000 people, Alexandria, Virginia. Many of you have been there because that's where Mount Vernon is, and it's the hometown of someone who's not much in favor these days, Robert E. Lee. And in that town, it now is 150,000 people, same area, but it was a very small southern town where Roman Catholics and Jews were very much the minority. It was really a Southern Baptist ethos. So I learned a great deal about Southern Baptists by osmosis. But the Catholics and the Jews in the town sort of clung together because we were a minority, both of us. And I learned more, I suppose, about Catholicism than I did about Judaism sometime. At least that's what my rabbi thought. After I got out of the service, as Rabbi Egan was kind enough to say, I served civilian congregations in Kansas City, Missouri. That's how you pronounce it, Missouri, not Missouri, Missouri, where I had the privilege of meeting President Truman, and we talked a good deal about Japan. You can imagine what the conversation was. Not always very pleasant, because he told me, he said, Rabbi, Mrs. Truman and I can never go to Japan because of the atomic bombs that were on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. From there I went to Champaign, and again, as the rabbi said, I studied American history at the great University of Illinois. So the question is, how can a Jewish boy from Virginia spend maybe 20 visits to the Vatican as part of my work? And in the 32 years I was at the American Jewish Committee, which is based in New York City, I made 43 round-trip transatlantic flights. Now, the AJC never put me up in business class or in first class, and many of you have flown those night flights across the Atlantic in coach. Well, when you do it 43 times one way and 43 times coming the other way, you learn all about airplanes, passport control, the rotten food you get, and the inability to sleep. And most of those trips, I ended up in Rome at the Vatican. So I want to talk to you very briefly tonight, and then I know you'll have a lot of questions about the Vatican, about the Roman Catholic Church and its relations with the Jewish people, and what I did there, and what were some of the issues we faced. I want to say also that I probably knew and worked, and here I will be very immodest. My family thinks that's true every day they're with me. So, but in an immodest way, I want to say I probably knew and worked with more Cardinals than play on the St. Louis baseball team or on the Arizona National Football League Cardinals. And I want to mention just several. Maybe you knew them, or maybe the Roman Catholics here tonight were part of their archdiocese. Cardinal Joseph Bernardin of Chicago, Cardinal William Keeler of Baltimore, Cardinal John O'Connor, who was my very close friend, as you'll soon discover, in New York City, and many other cardinals as well, both here and in Europe. Now, what is the Vatican? Well, it's a section of the city of Rome that is only 100 acres. Think about it. It's only 100 acres in size. If you're from New York City or you've been to New York, it's 1/8 the size of Central Park. It's very small. Some of you will remember the movie where Rex Harrison plays a pope and Charlton Heston is Michelangelo. The Pope throughout history actually led armies at times. There were papal states that were under papal control, under the Vatican's control. But in the 1920s, there was an agreement between the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini and the Vatican that established Vatican City, this very small 100-acre piece of real estate in Rome. And many of you, of course, have been to Rome and you've been to the Vatican, and you know how small it is. But it has enormous moral, emotional, and spiritual power because the Bishop of Rome is de facto the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. I had 11 meetings in the United States, Israel, and in the Vatican with Pope John Paul II, who was, of course, from Poland, and 2 meetings with Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI Emeritus, who is from Germany. So actually, those were 12 meetings that I had with 2 popes. I want to give a brief description of the kind of work and events, some of them very pleasant, and some of them maybe not so much. And I have just 5 of them, and this is what a Jewish boy from Virginia was doing after all those long flights across the Atlantic. The first was leading up to full and formal diplomatic relations between Israel, the state of the Jewish people, a very unique nation in the world, the one and only state of the Jewish people, and the Vatican, which is also a very unique entity with its own passport, its own radio and television stations, its own post offices as an independent city-state. 2 very unique entities entered finally in 1993 and 94 full and formal diplomatic relations. So the holy city of Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, and the eternal city of Rome have been united in a sense diplomatically since 2,000 years ago. But it was not until 1993 and 94 that the Vatican and the State of Israel entered into these full and formal diplomatic relations. The American cardinal, and it's no secret who played a key role in bringing that about, was my friend, may he rest in peace, John O'Connor, the Archbishop of New York. He and I would talk on the phone and we would use first names, never in public, but privately. And he would say, Jim, the next time I go to Rome, I want to talk to my friends 1993, my friends in Rome, and find out what is the delay in building relationship that is full and formal between the Vatican and the State of Israel. Now, when he said friends, he really should have taken the S off the word. There was only one friend that he meant. They were both born, that is John Paul II and Cardinal O'Connor, in the same year, 1920. And they were very, very, very instrumental, to put it mildly, in bringing about this very important event that united, through diplomatic channels, the State of Israel and the Vatican. The second was a very difficult issue in which I was directly involved in. And you may recall it because it lasted 9 years. The Carmelites, a very beloved order of Roman Catholic sisters. And if you know your French Revolutionary history, you know the Carmelites were beheaded, in many of them, during the French Revolution. The Carmelites established a convent inside the walls, the gates rather, of the Auschwitz death camp in Poland. No one really noticed it at the time because Poland was behind the Iron Curtain. Very few of us in the West had ever been to Poland. For many Jews, their parents or grandparents or maybe great-grandparents were very glad to get out of Poland and Russia and come to the United States, a land of freedom. So no one paid much attention at the beginning when the Carmelites, this very, very spiritual order of nuns, set up a convent inside a building in Auschwitz. But it was soon found out that the building that they put the convent in was the very theater where the poison gas that the Germans were had stored for their extermination of 1.5 million Jews at Auschwitz. There was tension immediately. Why should the convent be right there inside Auschwitz, inside the theater that stored the poison gas? And the answer was they were being faithful to their tradition. They're praying for the people who were murdered there. But the Jewish community and many in the Catholic community, I want to repeat that, many in the Catholic community felt that the nuns should have their convent, but not there, not right there. And so the battle waged on for 9 years. It became a matter of international news. The Polish government and many Polish leaders, political leaders, religious leaders, felt that if the nuns moved from the theater where the gas was stored outside the wire fence of Auschwitz, which is where, as I said, over 1.5 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust. If they did that, that would be sufficient. That would be rather appropriate, but not inside the very place where Jewish martyrdom had taken place. The battle waged on and on and on and on. It reached the New York Times, the Washington Post, many European newspapers, television. It looked as if Catholic-Jewish relations were so strained they would break. But we had built up good relations since 1965 at the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council. And so I will hurry over and say that after 9 long years of public debate, arguments, tension, bad feeling, finally Pope John Paul II, and remember he was from Poland, finally wrote a letter to the 14 nuns and said, "You must leave." And what was their destination? I'm happy to tell you. It was a new building, an interreligious center on one side, and of course a convent on the other side, just about a few 100 meters outside the wire fence of Auschwitz. I was very fortunate to have spoken there several times, obviously not in the convent, but in the interreligious center. And the Pope was finally able to resolve the issue, which had threatened Catholic-Jewish relations. In 1994, again, John Paul II decided it was time to commemorate the Shoah. And I want to congratulate and publicly salute the Vatican, because when they talk about the Holocaust, that is the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the heart of Christian Europe, as Pope John Paul II has said, between 1933 and 1945. He wanted to commemorate the Holocaust, but the Vatican doesn't use the word Holocaust. To its credit, it uses the Hebrew word Shoah. And when I was at the Vatican, one of the many visits that I made, I asked one of the cardinals there, I said, I really appreciate the fact that you're using the Hebrew word Shoah, which means utter destruction, instead of the word Holocaust. And he turned to me and he said, Rabbi Rudin, people think and say that an earthquake is a Holocaust, a forest fire is a Holocaust, a hurricane in Florida is a Holocaust. And they are terrible, terrible, terrible natural disasters. But he was very wise. He said, Rabbi, if everything is a Holocaust and called that, then nothing is a Holocaust. He said, we want to use the word Shoah, which can only mean one thing, the murder of the 6 million Jews in the heart, as John Paul II said, in the heart of Christian Europe. And so I commend publicly here in this synagogue, and have done it so in Rome, the use of the word Shoah. And you should use that word. Or if you're going to use Holocaust, always spell it with a capital H, and then put in parentheses Shoah, S-H-O-A-H, the Hebrew word. That is how the Vatican often does it. So there was a concert that was held in Pope Paul VI Auditorium. Many of you have been to Rome, you know that it's a newer building. And this is the kind of man that John Paul II was. He invited as many survivors of the Shoah to Rome to come to the Vatican to be his personal guests at this concert to commemorate the terrible, terrible years, 1933 to 1945. And I was an honored guest there with the President of Italy and the Chief Rabbi of Rome in April 1994. Well, just before the concert, there was a gathering, and there were about 150 survivors of the Shoah there, and they were very nervous. They were worried. They came and they said, why did the Pope invite us? What is the Catholic Church? Why are they holding this concert? What is it all about? And I said, well, because the Pope is from Poland. He was born in 1920. In 1939, when he was only 19 years old, the Nazi Germans occupied his country. He saw the Shoah up close and personal. He went to an underground seminary. 25% of his hometown of Odovici was Jewish. He was the goalie on a Jewish soccer team. He was also, for the Jews in the room, he was a Shabbos Goy, which is the one who, on the Sabbath, because Orthodox Jews cannot make fire, they often call upon a person who's not Jewish who will do that on Shabbat, on Saturday. And that was what Carol Wojtyla did. Another Shabbos Goy was General Colin Powell in the Bronx, who also knew Yiddish because he knew the Jews of the Bronx so well. But they were still worried, these survivors, very worried. They said, what kind of reception are we going to get? What do I say, Rabbi Rudin, what do I say to the Pope when we meet him? I said, well, you should talk about your background in Poland and see what happens. So sure enough, after just before the concert, many of these survivors who were from Poland met the Pope, and you know what happened. They started speaking in Polish, and they started comparing. Did you know the family in Krakow? Yes, I knew them. Did you know the family up in Warsaw by the name of such and such? Did you know Father so-and-so in the 1930s in Białystok? Did you? And of course they started talking with the Pope, and then it became old friends talking to one another. It's like, did you know someone from Newport, from Venice, from Sarasota, from Fort Myers, from Naples? Yeah, I knew that family, sure. Of course I knew them. I knew his sister. Yeah, well, did you know his brother? Yes, I knew his. And they started talking and talking and talking. The tension went down, and of course, the Pope's aides were looking at their clock all the time. You know, come on, come on. The boss was taking up too much time. But they went on and on and on, all in Polish, and it was one of the highlights of my life to see the Roman Catholic Pope from Poland, speaking Polish to Jewish survivors from Poland at the Vatican just before the concert. And at that concert, the Pope gave one of his greatest speeches. And he was not in, I was maybe 25 feet from him when he spoke. And when he spoke, it was very clear, you know, he was a mystic in many ways. He was not in Rome anymore. He was not at the Vatican. He was back at Vadovici, his hometown. And he was looking around, and he said in English, they are calling out to us. They're speaking to us. They're saying to us, do not forget us. Do not ever forget us. And I am sure that in his mind, in his eye, were his friends from school, from the soccer team, from the town in which he grew up. He wasn't in Rome. He had been transported back to pre-war Poland. So that was quite a moment in 1994. The fourth event, or major event that I was involved in with the Vatican was the visit of the former Secretary General of the United Nations, and he became the President of Austria, Kurt Waldheim. Well, Kurt Waldheim visited the Vatican and received a state visits formalities. And it's no secret that many American cardinals were quite upset because it was known by that time that Kurt Waldheim was in fact a war criminal. During his career as an officer in the German army in the Second World War, you know the story, he went to the Balkans and was accused of killing many, many civilians. And so Kurt Waldheim received full honors at the Vatican, and then he returned to Vienna, and the Pope visited him there, and they were going to make a visit to Mauthausen, which is the camp in Austria. And there was a consultation many of us had, and we said, because Kurt Waldheim was not allowed to come to the United States because of his war record, he wanted to go to Mauthausen, his death camp in Austria, with the Pope. But Catholic authorities were wiser, and they felt quite correctly that the Pope should go there alone, without the President of Austria. And so he did, and it was a very, very moving moment for John Paul II. But Kurt Waldheim did not accompany him there. The final and most recent event in which I was involved in began in March 2020, and here I'll end my formal talk. There's been a great deal of questioning about the role of Pius XII, who was, of course, the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church from 1939, just on the eve of World War II, to 1958, when he was succeeded by John XXIII. What did Pius XII do during the war to help the victims of Nazism, the Jews, the Roman Catholic priests in Poland and elsewhere? And there was a great deal of controversy back and forth. What was the record of Pius XII? What did he do? What didn't he do? It was and remains a very, very emotional question for many Catholics and for many Jews. Well, thanks to the intervention of Pope Francis, he announced that 75 years after the end of World War II, the Vatican archives would be fully open to qualified scholars from around the world. Well, March 2020 was the opening of it, but you know what happened in March 2020. The world practically shut down because of the pandemic. But it's now going to be reopened, and scholars from around the world are now going to be able to go to Rome, go to the archives, and will be able to read, discover some of the things we don't know about Pius XII. So I'm eager to find out. I'm not a scholar of Italian or Latin. I leave it to the Catholic and Jewish scholars who will do that. But it will be very important to get more clarification. Let me close on a positive note. There have been more positive human relations between Catholics and Jews since 1965, the end of the Second Vatican Council, a little under 60 years ago. More in the last 60 years than there were in the first 1900 years of the Roman Catholic Church. That's not because we're so good, Catholics and Jews, working together. We are doing better than our parents, our grandparents, and our great-grandparents have done. It's because of the Second Vatican Council condemnation of anti-Semitism, because the Second Vatican Council called for a dialogue between Catholics and Jews, not only between priests and rabbis, that's easy, but between lay people, lay men and women, such as tonight. That's what's important. And because of that, because of the last 60 years, again, in colleges, universities, seminaries, throughout the world, and more advances, more positive relationships, more excellent scholarship, joint scholarship, and we're going to see more now that the archives at the Vatican are open between Roman Catholics and Jews than we saw in the first 1900 years. Years that had many, many spots of sunshine, but also many, many years of darkness, of mutual suspicion, misunderstanding, stereotyping, bigotry. So we are now in a sunlit place. We have over 60 years, actually, of the advancement that has been made. And I feel very honored that I played a little part of it in my work at the Vatican and in the United States. But I would leave this tonight with a charge to you, or as we say in the South, in Virginia, to y'all. It's up to the lay people, not just Rabbi Agin and Catholic priests in Florida, not just to me and cardinals I may still be working with, or archbishops, or sister superiors and mother superiors. It's up to you, the people who live on the ground, who are living together. It's up to you to make sure that the promises that were made at the Vatican, at Vatican Council II, the promises the Jews and Catholics have made since 1965 come true. To put it in coarse business terms, because many of you are business people, I want to say it's now a retail operation. We have all the statements, all the declarations, all the manifestos, all the speeches, all the sermons that we need. What counts now is for Catholics and Jews on the ground to come together, to work for the common good, to overcome anti-Catholicism where it appears, anti-Semitism where it appears, bigotry of any kind. I want to think that my work for 32 years, and I see my cousin, Dr. Neil Zussman, and brings back a lot of family memories, because my family, Neil, didn't quite understand what I was trying to do for those 32 years. They thought it was a nice thing that their son was a rabbi doing Christian-Jewish relations. Only toward the end of their lives did they realize how important the development of positive relations are. So I would hope that you don't have to depend on people like me at a certain level at the Vatican to build Catholic-Jewish relations. What really counts is what happens in Charlotte County, Lee County, the state of Florida, the United States of America, North America, throughout the world. So I hope you'll join with me. Maybe you won't get to the Vatican. Maybe you won't get inside the library, the archives, the Sistine Chapel, behind the tourist places. But please know, they are committed to improving Catholic-Jewish relations. The leaders of the Roman Catholic Church today, from Pope Francis down. So now it's your turn. So I hope you will join with us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Rudin. I appreciate the wonderful words. We took up most of our time. We have time for maybe one or two questions.
Rabbis always do that.
If there are any questions. Okay, well, that's wonderful. I'm glad that you feel that. Going back there. Yes, sir.
One. On the word Holocaust, I grew up thinking that it was the devastation and everything, the slaughter. But when I started studying with Jewish people, I understood that it was burnt offerings, is what it meant. Am I correct or not?
What's the question?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Okay. The word Holocaust.
The word Holocaust, yes?
Right. I grew up thinking it was this disaster thing, but when I started studying, I understand, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, because I really want to know.
I can answer that.
Burnt offering.
I can answer that because it's a Greek word and it means burning everything, and it started when they had battles like in the war of Troy and all that, and they would offer slaughter of bulls and calves and everything to feed the soldiers. And so Holocaust, that means that you burn everything or kill everything. And it was adopted, I guess, to talk about what happened.
Yeah, well, but the point is, you're exactly right. What this priest said to me, which made a lot of sense in Rome, he said, look, if you put the word Holocaust to each disaster should stand alone on its own.
Okay.
Don't compare it to something else. An earthquake is a horrible, horrible thing. A fire in California is horrible. A flood in Venice, Italy, is terrible. Each must stand on its own. Don't trivialize it or make them less. Let them all be stated. But if you say everything, there was an accident on I-75 and God forbid people were killed, and somebody was able to, it was a Holocaust of fire. It cheapens the word and it cheapens the tragedies that people suffer. So what the Vatican was trying to say, and when I comment, and I'll say it again, they said, let us use the word Shoah, which can only mean one thing: utter destruction that was attempted by the Nazi German regime and their collaborators to kill every Jew that they could get their hands on. That's what Shoah means. You can use Holocaust, as you quite rightly said, you can use it for a lot of things, but don't make everything is not a Shoah. So,
Well, let me thank you all for coming, and please, on your way out, there are bowls, there are bins there, sweet treats. Please help yourself. There are bags there, and we wish you a pleasant Shabbat, a pleasant weekend, a day of peace and rest for your Sunday services. And we say to you, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for coming.
Shabbat Shalom. Tell your friends. Anybody wants to say
It's